Major funding for this program has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding has been provided by the Alfred Yerzykovsky Foundation, the J.S. Johnson and Barbara P. Johnson Fund in the New York Community Trust, the Polish-American Congress, the Joyce Foundation, and the Friends of the Struggles for Poland. A complete donor list is available from WNET. You may order any one or all 9 episodes of The Struggles for Poland. Each home video cassette is $29.95 or $99.95 for the entire series. For credit card orders, call 1-800-451-7020. The Struggles for Poland chronicles the history of a nation once again at a pivotal point in relations between East and West. The companion book to the series, written by journalist Neil Asherson, takes you further inside the least intimidated society within the Soviet bloc. This hardcover volume is over 250 pages, features rare archival photographs, and is available for $19.95. For credit card orders, call 1-800-451-7020. Major funding for this program has been provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding has been provided by the Alfred Yerzykovsky Foundation, the J.S. Johnson and Barbara P. Johnson Fund in the New York Community Trust, the Polish-American Congress, the Joyce Foundation, and the Friends of the Struggles for Poland. A complete donor list is available from WNET.
I'm Roger Mudd. In our series, The Struggles for Poland, we have arrived at the brink of the Second World War. What happened next across the Polish countryside is almost impossible to comprehend. As Europe lurched toward disaster in the 1920s and 30s, one country after another saw its democratic government fall to be replaced by dictatorship. A new political idea was emerging called fascism. The strength of fascism lay in its power to take a disillusioned people and unite them into a cult of nationhood. In its most extreme form, fascism made the nation itself an object of worship. Unity within the nation became an almost divine principle, and any deviation from the norm a dangerous threat. Throughout Europe, fascist organizations appeared, and fascist states in Italy and in Spain and in Germany. The German totalitarian state was the most extreme. In their quest for absolute national unity, the Nazi fascists sought to eliminate anyone unacceptable in their eyes: communists, gypsies, especially Jews. Nazi racial principles would soon have a devastating effect upon conquered Poland. In the central regions of Poland, most of the people were ethnically Polish. More than 2/3 of them were peasants. Until the 19th century, there had hardly been a Polish middle class. Towns and cities were inhabited by the upper class and by another group as close to a middle class as Poland had, the Jews. In the early 20th century, Jews constituted about 10% of Poland's population, but about 1/3 of its urban population. Not only was the Jewish community large, it was ancient. There had been Jews in Poland since its founding in the 10th century. In the 13th century, Polish princes and nobles had invited Jews from Germany to develop Poland's trade and commerce. They became the merchants, artisans, estate managers, and innkeepers of Poland. When full legal rights were extended to Jews in the 19th century, they entered the professions as well. They became lawyers, doctors, journalists, and academics. About half of Poland's professional class was Jewish by the 1930s. There were tensions between Poles and Jews, tensions brought on by religious and cultural differences. But most Poles accepted the Jewish community as an integral part of Poland's cultural landscape. In the course of what Poland was about to endure, however, that landscape would be made unrecognizable.
It was a rich cultural Jewish life in Poland that I don't think that people that didn't live there could understand. We had Yiddish theaters, we had concerts, we had lectures, we had libraries. There were 5 Yiddish dailies in Warsaw alone, with hundreds of Yiddish writers, journalists, prose writers, poets. They think that we were poor, and they think poor people don't have a rich cultural, spiritual life. But we had it.
They read books, they argued about politics, and they believed they were standing on the threshold of great changes in the world. They thought about Marxism and Zionism and Freudianism. And these Jews really believed that the arguments and discussions and talks amongst themselves could really change the face of the world. And quickly, in their lifetimes.
Between the two world wars, the Jewish community of Poland was the largest in Europe. 3 million Jews, 10% of Poland's entire population. Jews had lived in Poland for 1,000 years and were deeply rooted in its economic, intellectual, and professional life. For centuries, Catholic peasants from the countryside had come to market towns to sell their produce to Jewish merchants.
The people in Kolbych, especially the Jews, practically everybody was related to somebody. Everybody had his first name, and then he had a name, like for instance, he was a tailor, his name was Schneider. He was a shoemaker, he was Schuster. He was limping, he was the Lume. He was deaf, he was the Toibe. And this is how we describe the people. Market day was on a Tuesday. Usually in those small towns, the market days were Tuesday because Tuesday is considered to be a lucky day. So they picked out Tuesday. Our town was very religious, and I would say that 90% were Orthodox, and all of us had sidelocks, and we wore covers on the head. The Jews between themselves spoke Yiddish, but with the peasants they spoke Polish. The Polish peasants, they were very poor. They didn't have even enough money to buy a quarter of a liter kerosene, a quarter of a kilo sugar. So they didn't eat the chickens that they raised. They didn't eat the eggs that they raised. They had to sell it for those things.
Dealing with each other daily, Jews and peasants developed close relationships. But there were tensions as well, both religious and cultural. In Kolbyshev and throughout Poland, there were memories of violent attacks against the Jews. In 1918 and 19, more than 300 Jews had been killed and thousands terrorized in disturbances which followed the rebirth of Polish independence. Attacks were often led by anti-Semitic elements in the Polish army. Publicity about the attacks caused protests abroad. In Poland, the presence of so many minority groups posed a threat to political stability. 1/3 of the people within the country's new borders were not Polish. There were Germans, Lithuanians, Belarusians. The largest minority in Poland were the 5 million Ukrainians, fiercely committed to their own dreams of independence. The Jews lived throughout the new state. The rights of all minorities had been guaranteed by international treaty at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. Poland's first leader after World War I, Marshal Józef Pilsudski, dreamed of Poland as a multi-ethnic state with equal rights for all its citizens. His dream was not shared by the more traditional powers in the country. Arrayed against him were right-wing political forces encouraged by the Roman Catholic Church.
Ludu
The majority of ethnic Poles were Roman Catholic. Many were peasants who distrusted those of other religions, particularly the Jews.
There were people who absolutely didn't know the Jews, didn't have contact with the Jews at all, who simply believed that the Jews murdered Jesus. People deeply believed that Jews made use of the blood of a Christian child, that they killed the child, and they used the blood to make Passover bread.
In the public schools of the new Polish state, minority students were sometimes seen as alien.
With special one teacher, I had a lot of problems. He was the young teacher, and he was in the Polish army, he was a lieutenant, he was in the reserve, and he came probably, it was the first time that he encountered that he had those little Jewish boys with long earlocks, and it was not, he didn't like it. So he took together all the Jewish boys in one class, and from the first to the fourth grade, and there were probably about 150 boys, and he came in this morning and put on a white glove on one hand, in the other hand he had a clipper. And he took each boy one by one, he cut off one earlock. I think I was 7 or 8 years old, and I ran out, and on the way from the school to my father, I yelled, Tata Mishnah Pais. Tata, it means, Daddy, they cut our earlocks.
For Orthodox Jews, outward appearance, family life, food, work, everything was governed by 613 commandments. Religious study began at the age of 3.
One of the main features of the Jewish way of life was the involvement with learning, with studying. Studying Torah, studying Talmud, studying the law. Within our community, this was a happy life. This was a life full of joy, a life full of satisfaction. You knew you were close to God, and for us, we were told that the Jews are only a nation or a people by virtue of Torah.
Though most Jews still attended synagogue, many were seeking alternatives to their restricted lives. Many emigrated to the United States until American laws imposed quotas. Others went to Palestine, drawn by the dream of a Jewish homeland. The 20th century brought new perspectives and political movements.
There was an upsurge of secular life in the 20s amongst the young people. The older ones remained religious. People read a lot. In our childhood and later on, we read world literature. Either we read it in Polish, or we read it in German, or we read it in Hebrew. You see, living in the war, we spoke 5 languages when we were kids. My father, he was one of the Chovevei Tzion, one that loved Palestine. Wherever there are Jews, if there are 10 Jews, there are 11 parties, you know. So the Zionist movement was the same way, you know. They had so many different shadings and variations and splinters and whatnot.
The Zionists, advocates of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, led Jewish representatives in the Polish parliament. Thousands of young people joined Zionist youth groups. But in Jewish politics, as in all Polish politics, there was no unity. Argument and disagreement ruled. Vladimir Jabotinsky, a charismatic Russian Zionist, arrived in Warsaw in 1926. He encouraged Jews to give up life in other nations, to emigrate to Palestine and fight to create a modern state of their own. Enthusiastic crowds gathered from all over the country to hear him. Other Zionists cared less about a new Jewish state and more about a new Jewish way of life.
We were going to build 2 things. On the one hand, we were going to our country, where we could be Jews, where there would be our homeland, and also the feeling that we were going to build a new world from a social point of view, without oppression, with a sense of kibbutz life, with the feeling that there should be equality between people.
Most Orthodox Jews believe that only God could lead them back to the Holy Land. Their organization, Aguda Israel, opposed the Zionists and pledged to preserve Jewish life as defined by the rabbis or teachers.
And so the Aguda had the support of the Orthodox masses. And in order to achieve its aims and to preserve traditional life and to withstand the onslaught of secularism, secular Jewish nationalism, for that purpose, it developed a great organized educational system. It published papers. They represented Orthodox Jews towards the Polish government.
The Aguda sought to defend Jewish rights through a policy of accommodation with the government. But anti-Jewish politics in Poland had a powerful leader, Roman Dmowski, head of the right-wing National Democrats. Jews, he declared, form at least 10% of our population, and in my judgment, this is at least 8% too many. Unless restrictions are imposed upon them soon, all our lawyers, doctors, and small merchants will be Jews. Pilsudski deplored anti-Semitism. His leadership kept the right-wing forces at bay.
Our Pilsudski, our beloved Pilsudski. Dear grandfather, as we call him. With his strong fist, he gave back to us our beloved Poland. He is adored everywhere, from thatched farmsteads to where there are factories. Let him live a long life. Our beloved Marshal Pilsudski.
I felt very patriotic. At home we only spoke Polish. I came from a very unreligious family. We lived in a not Jewish section of Warsaw. My father had a wholesale textiles store. My parents loved to go to the museums, concerts, opera, and theater. And when I was 8 years old, they took me first time to see Carmen.
Many artists, musicians, and writers were of Jewish background. Among them, Julian Tuwim, one of Poland's greatest poets. His satirical poem, Ball at the Opera, experimented with the shape and sound of language while presenting an apocalyptic vision of Poland's social and political life.
At the Opera House, a ball. The archicrat of this great nation grants his highest commendation. Tarts are scrubbing scanty panties, prowling bargain basement racks. In the streets, there's great elation.
Na ulicach ściskizator ustawili się żołnierze. Błyszczą kaski kirasierskie, błyszczą buty oficerskie. Konie pienią się i rżą, ryczą auta, tłumy prą. Wszelkie wstęgi, śnieżne gorsy, szambelany i buldogi pełnomocne, i teriery, i bourbony, i szynszyle, i ordery, i sobole, i grandiuki, i geryngi, i akselbandy, i lampasy, i wikingi, admirały, generały, bojarowie, bambirały, grubasowie, ambasadorowie. Raz, dwa, hurra paniowie, hurra panowie, hurra panowie.
The everyday language of most Polish Jews was Yiddish. Based on an ancient form of German, it united a diverse community. In Polish cities, 1 of every 3 people was Jewish. Many Jews were prominent in the professions and in commerce and in the textile industry. The ideals of socialism attracted many Jews. A few were active in the tiny Polish Communist Party. Many more joined the powerful anti-communist Jewish Labor Bund. Though guided by international socialism, in Poland, the Bund struggled for Jewish cultural independence. It offered a world of its own: schools, medical services, newspapers, libraries.
The school where I went to was a Bundist school. That means that the teachers, most of them, were members of the Bund. And the philosophy was a Bundist socialist philosophy. And we were, in a way, indoctrinated into that philosophy. The philosophy that Jews are part of Poland, where we live. We are suffering, yes, Jews are suffering, but Poles are suffering too. And we have to build a better Poland, not to be assimilated, but to build a creative Jewish life in our own language, in the Yiddish language. Where I lived and where most of Jewish children lived, you never saw a tree. You never saw green grass.
The Bund filmed the living conditions of many Warsaw children and the alternative experience the Bund offered.
The Madam Sanitarium, this was for the underprivileged, sickly Jewish children. That was built mainly by the Bundists with the help of American Jewish workers. I went there almost every year, sometimes twice a year. The first time I came back, I remember I stood at the window of our little so-called apartment, a one-room apartment. I looked out the window. I couldn't hold back my tears. It was a different world. And yet, you would think because of that kind of life, we would be estranged from our own environment. No, this only showed us how life could be beautiful if we build another world, a better world for us and for everyone else.
By 1934, Germany and the Soviet Union cast an increasing shadow over Polish politics. Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels was invited to Warsaw, where he lectured on Nazi policies. From his government palace, the reclusive and ailing Pilsudski prophesied war.
I remember the day when we found out that Pilsudski was dead, and it was a very, very sad day. In general, important, but it was also very sad for the Jews, because we felt something was in the air. We felt that there would be changes.
The Polish government had already renounced the international supervision of minority rights guaranteed at the Paris Peace Conference. As right-wing influence spread, a weak regime under Pilsudski's successor, Edward Rydz-Śmigły, did little to stem the new tide of anti-Jewish violence. Between 1935 and 1937, attacks on Jews in Poland's towns and villages claimed 79 lives. The Polish government denounced the violence, but supported economic boycotts of the Jews. The Catholic primate, Cardinal Holland, also denounced violence, though he stated, "It is an actual fact that the Jews fight against the Catholic Church and constitute the vanguard of atheism, Bolshevism, and revolution. The Jews," he said, "are committing frauds and dealing in white slavery." Cardinal Holland urged Catholics to boycott Jewish shops and traders.
And they said to the peasants, the merchants, the workers, that the Jews were taking their places, that their economic distress arose from the fact that positions for earning a living, which by rights should have been theirs, were taken by Jews.
Anti-Semitism was now being widely used as a political tool by the press, radio, church, and government. In January 1937, Foreign Minister Joseph Beck told the Polish Parliament that Poland had room for barely 500,000 Jews, and that therefore 3 million would have to leave. By the late 1930s, the Polish Socialists were the only major political party actively opposing anti-Semitism. All the fears and frustrations of the nation were turning against the Jews.
I remember that as a child, I wasn't able to go to school by myself. And we organized a whole group because they used to throw stones, and they would attack us and shout, "Jews go to Palestine," things like that. In other words, this feeling that